caused by centuries
Sorry.
of genocide and forced relocation, boarding schools. One moment here as I go through the slideshow. Thank you for that moment right there. Forced relocation, boarding schools, and other forms of attempted cultural erasure and injustice. In solidarity with Black Lives Matters, we acknowledge the past and current racial violence, such as slavery and forced labor, exclusionary policies, and police brutality, which have deeply harmed Black, Indigenous, and people of color. BIPOC. As organizations, we are striving imperfectly to abolish unjust systems and actions through organizational and individual anti-racist training, building trust and partnerships with BICO-led organizations, leading anti-racist programming that recognizes Indigenous values and perspectives, highlighting the voices, experiences, and achievements of our partners and community members of color in their fights for climate justice and equitable education, standing with Dakota and Anishinaabe communities in protest of Line 3 pipeline and the fight to protect our waters. Please follow these links, landback.org and Native Land to learn more information. We appreciate you. And tonight's discussion will include what is solar on schools, the bill and the program? What does it look like to be implemented? Why it's important? And our student leaders will share that as they're on the call, so look forward to it. And what you can do to show support today. So we will move on to the next slide. And I will pass that on to Sarah Wolf. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramiro. And thank you so much for everyone who's joined here tonight. I hope we pique your interest with the projects that we're doing, and that you'll want to know more and be involved in what we're talking about. You may have already heard about solar on schools, and it's been happening for the last couple of years. Legislation was passed in 2021, creating the Solar on Schools program, and it's been wildly popular. I mean, schools are in all of our communities, no matter where you are in the States. Schools are a central part of life, and the program was really designed so that we could stimulate the installation of solar energy on Minnesota's public schools, and then also colleges and universities, and then use this as a learning opportunity for not only the students who are in the school, but the community that surrounds the school as well. So I'm going to give you an outline of what the existing Solar on Schools program is and how it's working, and then share with you some of the realities of how it's not working ideally, and what we're striving to do to fix that in this current session. Thanks. For the next slide. So across Minnesota, it really was divided into two kinds of categories for this legislation, and I'll explain why. Basically, you have the schools within Xcel Energy's territory, and you had all the schools outside of Xcel Energy territory. And the reason there is that kind of categorization is because Xcel Energy funds something called the Renewable Development Account. And that account is supposed to go for renewable projects that are inside Xcel's territory. Why does Xcel fund this account? Well, it does it as an agreement that it made years ago. It would pay certain millions of dollars for each cask of nuclear waste that it stored at Prairie Island. And so because that continues, there's a funding stream into this renewable development account. And lots of projects are put forward for this, and the legislature decides which ones get to move forward. But part of that was then directed into Xcel territory schools, schools within the Excel territory, and they could have solar put on through this monies from this renewable development account. But that left greater Minnesota or schools outside of that territory without funding. So they matched it with funding from the general fund for those schools outside of Excel's territory. So we have those two tracks, and each track received $8 million, one from the general fund, and for Excel's territory schools, it was from the renewable development account. And they also had an appropriation for $2.5 million for state colleges and universities. Next slide. Thank you. And just to give you a sense of where schools are in Minnesota, you can see that here they are. They're everywhere. And MNIPL has really had a vision for making these schools that stretch across our state centers for community resilience. So if you just do a tap on the next slide, basically imagine all of these places being centers of community resilience that have solar and battery storage and the ability to function, even if something goes awry in the surrounding area. Even if there is a power line goes down, people can get somewhere where they can have access to electricity in a storm or in a kind of an emergency situation. This is about creating pockets of resilience across our state. And what better place to do that than a school? Next slide, please. But I really want to talk about how this is working for us, this program. And it's really only been going on for a few months now, but here are some of the program guidelines. I'm going to ask you, this is talking about the solar installation being used as part of an educational curriculum, which is part of what schools are doing. But in the next slide, again, we're going to get more into the details. I know Simon is going to help us with that a little bit later. But if we can go to the very next slide, I'll just say, this program has been really popular. In fact, 85 different districts, school districts, have applied for funding through the Department of Commerce, and they're moving through those applications. And they had $11 million worth of applications for the $8 million worth of funding that they had. So we're not funding it at the level that it might be used. But in addition to that, what we've really seen is that there is a difference between the metro area schools and how large their arrays can be and the schools outside of that metro area. And when I say metro area, I'm not really, I mean, what I mean is the Excel territory schools. There was no limit for the size of array that an Excel territory school could be. So you could have a high school that puts up an array that really meets, close to its need for energy consumption. But because of net metering laws and the way that interacts in a kind of a difficult ecosystem with rural electric co-ops and munis, all those utilities that are outside of Excel area, it has meant that those schools were capped at about a 40 kilowatt array. And a 40 kilowatt array, you all know this probably much better than I do, but that might be a right size for a very large house, but it's not the right size for most schools. Most schools, that might be 5 to 10% of what the school needs. So when we are looking at this, we're saying, okay, this is a great program, but we're not really building to the capacity that is needed by the school or that's available for that solar array. And there are a lot of reasons, and there are no bad players in this. I'm not meaning to cast any kind of arrows anywhere. I'm just saying this is a situation we would like to see if we can fix. And that's what we're embarking on with the legislation that we're working on this session. Next slide, please. What we would like to do is, first of all, and this is when it's include tribal schools. Right now, that wasn't written into the bill. That is an easy fix, and I know all legislators and authors are really looking to fix that for sure in this next legislation that's coming up. But the second thing we'd like to do is fix that inequity between the Excel area schools and the non-Excel area schools. And then we need to find a structure that can cover all of the schools with right-sized arrays. Are we going to be in a situation where we're able to move forward with just a few $1,000,000 in each year through these funds? Or are we going to be able to scale up to meet the needs of all schools? Next slide, thanks. So to explain the dynamic here that we're moving at the legislature, we introduced a bill, and as so often the case, the bill that gets introduced isn't exactly the perfect bill that you want to end up with, but it inspires discussion. And that's what's been happening since our bill was introduced. And here's an outline of where our discussions have evolved to right now. Some of this was in our initial bill, and some of it is what we're moving towards. One is that we keep the Solar on Schools grant program. We would really like to invest more into that grant program. There's a formula that the Department of Commerce uses to kind of figure out what schools would most benefit from the grant program. And we would, of course, like to increase that funding. But reality is there are a lot of good programs seeking a lot of funding. And so we're not sure how much of an investment the legislature will be able to make in that. But another thing you can do in addition to grants is you can create a loan program. And what loans allow you to do is to recycle funding and make it available for schools. We know that the Infrastructure Reduction Act, the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed this past August by the federal government is going to make a lot of funding available in rebates and refunds when solar installations are put on. But upfront capital is an issue. And so a loan program helps with that. And it also helps be able to keep going beyond the just the initial investment that grants might make. We want to be able to right size those arrays so they are the appropriate size for the school for considering the space that's available, and also projecting, we know that schools are going to need more electricity in the future when they are not using fossil fuels, when they have infrastructure for transportation, electric buses for school buses and other things. So we're looking at right sizing it by saying, what is 120% of what you've used or what you're contractually committed for using in the next year? And we need to be able to ensure that these schools are interconnected, and interconnection can be a problem as we are about embarking on this transition. Whether you are a residence or a school or a business, interconnection issues are happening, and our utilities are wanting to move forward on that, but they might need help, especially those utilities that are the rural electric co-ops or munis. And so what we're advocating for is creating an infrastructure grant program, so that up to $250,000 per project could be applied for, so that the state is helping those rural electric co-ops and munis make sure that they can do the grid upgrades necessary to support the array that is installed. And they don't have 18 months to do that. I know there are lots of moving pieces and supply chain issues and a lot of things. So that's quite a bit of time, but we think that helps make it possible for the utilities to participate in this. And then it leaves the net metering in place at that 40 kilowatt level, which is something that we think we are hoping we could have a study that the University of Minnesota is funded to do, to engage the rural electric co-ops, the munis, the schools, the community, to figure out how can we create a program for net metering, or a program that makes sure that the community utilities and the community schools can all benefit from going forward putting solar on these schools. So I think I'm probably getting pretty close to running out of time. Do I have any more slides here? The last piece I want to talk about is also we're advocating for a curriculum grant program. And that is to help schools be able to get the curriculum and incorporate it that helps students in the community have access to understanding not only about the solar array that's on the school, but about various programs that are available to help the community know about employment, training, and those kinds of things within the solar field. So thanks so much. We are let's see, did I have anything else on this slide? I don't think so. I think there might be one more just to talk about where we are at the legislative situation. We have a bill introduced and we're seeking a hearing for it. And right now I'm going to end up coming back to this with the bill numbers that we're asking you to follow. But for instance, tomorrow in the House, there is a hearing on solar in schools, and it is a hearing that does a little bit. It refunds the program like it was funded in the last biennium, but it doesn't necessarily tackle some of these inequities that we're seeing. And so we are in communication with legislators and those chairs. And what we're hoping to do, and we're going to be asking you to do, is help us raise the issue so that we can fix it, so that there is a desire to fix this problem, so all schools can be those centers of resilience. Thank you so much. And I think I'm going to pass it back to you, Ramiro.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for sharing what is solar on schools and the bill and where it's at. We do have a question for you if you have a moment to answer in the chat here that I could read off from Ginger. So this bill will give Excel control of all solar, and they will receive all the funding for solar from the government, correct? Is Ginger's question.
Ginger, thank you so much for the for this question. And I think you're naming one of the really critical questions here is who's going to own this solar that is put on top of the schools. And our hope is that as we move forward, we're going to have schools that are owning that solar so that the school can benefit from what it's receiving. And when we talk about government funding, this is through the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think Simon might be even talking more about that. So we'll come back to that question if we need to at the end, but thanks so much. And maybe we should go to Simon.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, and we'll pass it on to Simon.
Yeah, you guys able to hear me okay?
Yes,
Ramiro?
we can.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, so my name is Simon. I'm technical sales for Real Solar. Just quick blurb is we're a solar installer in Bacchus, Minnesota, so about 40 minutes north of Brainerd. So kind of one of the few solar installers headquartered in definitely rural Minnesota. And we used to be owned by Rural Renewable Energy Alliance, and they played a very large role in I'd say creating, what led to the Solar for Schools program and all these grants that are available now. So just had to give them a shout out real quick. But we, as of now, are a for-profit solar installer. This year, we're doing probably 2 of these school projects. So not, I guess, a ton, but there's a lot of solar installers out there, a lot of schools that applied. So I do have some hands-on experience actually working through these grants with some schools. And so these guys saw that I was fit to answer some of these questions and go through the details. So yeah, next slide. So there is a bit to it. So I think these few slides will, if there's any like teachers or members of school faculty or students or anything in the crowd or in this webinar, I just want to go through what this thing actually takes because not a lot of people know. It is quite a bit of work, especially for admin or whoever is trying, from the school to get this money. So I'm just going to go through basically what it takes and then give a couple examples of how, like what it costs and what it actually shakes out to be. So again, a solar bid is really just one piece of this grant. Largely, it's all through the Minnesota Department of Commerce. And so there's an email you can reach out if you have preliminary questions or you think your school is looking forward to applying for one of these. Right now, as of 2023, round one has closed. If you can see on the right there, you needed to have the readiness assessment done by February 21st, which was already an extension. And then if you're able to get that in, then you can do a full grant due by May 31st, but you had to get that assessment in by the 21st of February. So there is a round two that is being expected. It's to be determined. So you can go onto the Department of Commerce website and subscribe to their email lists and get more information on that. You want to bot back 2 slides, Ramiro, if you could? There we go. So just a couple things that Sarah mentioned already. You need to be a public K through 12 school or a state-owned college and university. Hopefully with the revisions in place, tribal schools can get on it too. But I have worked with private schools or charter schools, and they are not eligible for this money, unfortunately. There is some Inflation Reduction Act money available for them too, but I can get to that shortly. The ANTC value plays a large role in how much money you can receive. There's that link there. If someone wants to drop it in the chat, you can look up your school and see what that value is. And if you see the table on the right, basically depending on, my understanding is the money that is allowed to each pupil in the school budget. There's a big list of all the numbers. The school can receive certain amounts of the solar array like to be paid for. So the lowest budget schools are able to get 95% of the system paid for, so up to 114,000, where some of the higher funded schools would get up to 30,000 or 25% of the system paid for. And then colleges and universities can get the 40%. And just a quick note that that rule, like all of those rules on the right there, they apply to outside of Excel territory. The schools that are within Excel territory have their own set of rules and guidelines. And I believe the theme of this webinar is mostly around outside of Excel, especially rural Minnesota. So again, it's important to know there are 2 phases with the school readiness assessment being an important first step. Once you are in it and you have that completed, I think most of the time schools are able to get the grant application done, no problem. So next slide, Ramiro. Okay, so it's the question, how can I actually get a solar bid done for the school? So there are a lot of solar installers out there, and it can be difficult, especially if you're not familiar, to kind of wade through it all. And so CERT's I guess I forget what the acronym is, but CERT's Clean Energy Research Teams. There we go. They can help you with the entire process. They can help you find a bid or find an installer. They can put out a request for bids. They can also help you with all the other parts of the application. You can certainly go at it alone. You don't need to have their help. They just, it's one of their services they're willing to do. So there's a link to their website. If you are going through it with certs or alone, MNIPL is a great resource to find reputable installers. They have a find your installer page, and it has a list of a lot of installers in Minnesota that generally have been around and are reputable. And all you really have to do is call the installers. They should have a salesperson or consultant like me that can help design the systems and kind of work through the technical bits of the application. Some installers might not install these 40 watt or 40 kilowatt systems or bigger, but I would bet that it's more likely than not that they will. And depending on your school's procurement rules, you may need to solicit multiple bids. Most schools do need to receive a few bids. You can't just go get one. And I want to drive home that getting buy-in from school admin and the board is 100% necessary before you spend too much time on this. I'd say it's very important to get someone like the superintendent or maybe a big name in the school board, just somebody in the loop early, because you do need a lot of paperwork from the admin office. You ultimately need the superintendent to be on board. I spent a lot of time with a school and it ultimately got shot down. And so, you want to be respectful of everybody's time, because this can take a lot of time. So next slide. So I have about 3 or 4 slides of all the things you need for this school readiness assessment. We do not have enough time to go through every single word. So I'm just going to blast through this, but this is what you need for the first grant. And a lot of it has nothing to do with solar. It's a lot of just gathering of documents and paper pushing. And really, like I said, you need admin on board so they can help you and help you get all this stuff together. None of it is rocket science by any means. It just takes time. So if you look at this, CERT's Clean Energy Resource Teams has put together a great guide for schools outside of Excel territory. So here you can see on this first page, it is basically just a bunch of contact info for all of these important people within the school's administration. So next slide. Like I said, it is a huge checklist. Not going to go through all these, but I starred a few that solar installers would be able to help you with or help you navigate. So a copy of your most recent electric bill is very important. A description of existing distributed generation. So if the school does have any solar, you need to describe that. A letter of support from the electric utility. So say it's like Growing Power or Otter Tail or Beltrami or any of the many utilities. They're all very friendly when it comes to solar. They all just have certain rules, but you can definitely get that, no problem. And then, yeah, interconnection timeline estimates. That could be a combination of something a solar installer tells you, and then also with the utility. So next slide. So here's where a solar installer will really help you. And like I said, this can take time. It is all things that we do regularly, so it's nothing crazy for us, but it is very important to have this figured out. So proposed solar array descriptions. So big thing is, where is that going to go? Is it going to be on the roof? Is it going to be out in a field? I guess that is basically what this entire page is. If it's a roof, you need to know, how old is the roof? Are you going to impact the warranty? There's a lot that can go into it. Ground, mostly you need to know that there's no obstructions. Distance to where the meter is, where you're going to tie it in, and especially land use and zoning regulations can certainly mess with these if they're getting larger than a couple 100 feet. So there are a lot of details, but again, this is stuff that I navigate and any other solar installer knows how to navigate. So next slide. And then I guess the big thing here is that I highlighted is total dollar grant request based on that ANTC APU metric, but also a few other things here like procurement process and adjusted net tax capacity, that's the ANTC, insurance rate impacts, all things that administration can help you figure out, but it does take time. So, okay, next slide. Okay, so I did a little bit of a case study with Pine River Bacchus High School. This is just a few miles south of our office, so I'm pretty familiar with kind of their faculty, and we actually installed solar there. Spoiler alert, but they were a perfect case study here. So anyway, they're a fairly small rural Minnesota school. It's grades 7 through 12 at this school, a total of 386 students. But they still use 1,350,000 kilowatt hours annually, which very approximately costs them about $110,000 annually for those kilowatt hours. There's other things on their bills too that can raise the cost, but at least for that electric use, that is what it is costing them on the bill. So next slide. Okay, so there's a lot of numbers and words and everything on here, but I'll try to keep it concise. This is a photo of what is a 40 kilowatt AC array with a large, one of our large Chevy trucks next to it for scale. So it is, about 100 feet by 50 feet. So it still does take up a lot of space. It is a large system, but schools are massive and use a lot of electricity. So this is still not much. This is actually Leech Lake Tribal College pictured, just for fun. But again, we're pretending this is at Pine River. Something like this would do 60,000 kilowatt hours in a year. That is only 5% of Pine River Backus's annual usage. That amounts to about $4,800 to $6,000 of savings in its first year. So with the grant that we've been discussing, depending on the school, you can get 25 to 95% of that, the installed cost covered. And it would be directly owned by the school. You're selling the power back to these utilities, but that array is owned by the school. All that money goes, there's savings the school can use elsewhere. It will safeguard against high future energy prices, no matter the utility. And it is a fairly simple interconnection process, but overall it makes a pretty small impact on the annual costs. So just a couple quick dollar figures. Something like this is about $130,000 installed. The Solar for Schools grant, specifically for Pine River Backus, would only cover 40% of the array, so about 48,000. But other schools that maybe have a lower budget or lower income area could be up to $114,000 and 95%. And then you are able, on the remaining amount of money left, you can take a 30%, like a federal, it's kind of a confusing word, but a 30% direct payment of the remaining value. This is new with the Inflation Reduction Act. So it used to be a tax credit, and now it can be refunded to tax exempt entities, so schools or nonprofits or churches. But this would be about, let's see, yeah, about $24,600. So in this case, for Pine River Backus, the remaining cost would be $57,400. So they would need to come up with that money somehow. Plus, they need a loan to even pay for the project, because this grant money isn't just going to be immediately deposited to accounts. It takes a little while, and you need to pay the installer. So it is a great thing. This is by no means a bad thing that you can do all of this. There are just, it could be bigger, and there are some gaps and flaws. So next step, or next slide, please. So I did my best to scale this up for the proposed changes that we're trying to make at the legislative level to the Solar for Schools program. So this now is a picture of the array we actually installed at Pine River Backus years ago. Unrelated, but it is 800 kilowatts DC, 660 kilowatts AC. This produces about 80% of Pine River Backus's usage. So it's about a little under or a little over 1 million kilowatt hours. So I'm going to go over the costs quick and then go over the benefits. So 800 kilowatts DC would be about $1,750,000 installed. We have proposed that schools would be able to get grants up to $1 million. So that would cover the $1 million. So it'd be 750,000 left, where you'd be able to get the 30% direct payment from the federal IRS. So another 225,000 could be covered. There would still be a remaining cost, about $525,000. But we've also, as Sarah said before, ideally there'd be some sort of loan program they could bridge that gap with. I just kind of made a generic loan here as an example, but say a 20-year 3.5% APR loan would make a loan payment annually about $36,500. So back over to the right, sorry, I'm kind of jumping around, but each year, actually in the first year, this would save the school. Oh, I'm sorry, Ramiro, want to kick? There we go. I'm just on the right side of the screen, sorry. So back to the savings. This size array the value of the electricity in the year is about $83,200. They would still have that loan payment, which would be about $36,500 in the first year. But after all that, year one, the school would now be saving $46,600. As costs of electricity rise, that amount of money will only go up, matching it. Again, this is all owned by the school. There would be a loan involved through the state, ideally, but this is on the school's property, owned by the school, with a contract with the utility to buy it back at certain rates. Again, huge safeguard against future increases in energy prices, a much more substantial percentage of the school electricity than the current legislation. And ideally, these gaps in funding could be covered by a low interest loan. So that was an amazingly quick crash course on all of this. This is subject to change, all school to school, location to location, but this is a very quick run through of what a solar installer and possibly certs could help you figure out. Again, none of this is crazy. It's all been done before. It just takes time, and you really got to have buy-in from the school before you start digging into all this. So anyway, that's what I've got. I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to answer questions either now or at the end of the slideshow, because I know a lot of people still have to talk. So thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Simon, for that very thorough explanation on how to get solar done in your school. And we do have information of our speakers. Thank you, Sarah. And our speakers coming up, their information to ask questions and time at the end. And please place them in the chat. Once again, we have my favorite portion of this agenda, even though it has been so amazing from our guests today and our participants. I will be passing the mic to Michaela from Youth in Power, who's an apprentice. I'll let her share the rest. Thank you all, and here she is.
Hi, thanks, Ramiro. My name is Michaela. I'm 19 years old, and I'm a freshman at MCTC. I grew up in North Minneapolis, and I just recently graduated from Cooper High School last year, which is still very surreal. I've been doing environmental justice work for the past 5 years now, and I'm very passionate about environmental justice, especially because I'm from North Minneapolis, and North Minneapolis has the highest concentration of Black and Brown people in the state. We have the highest crime rate. We're faced with food insecurities, and I also have respiratory issues, so it pertains to me extremely. And I think having solar on all high schools and any school in general would be amazing. I recently graduated from high school, like I said, and in my 4 years at school, we never really learned environmental justice or social justice or renewable energies. We briefly covered like global warming, I think my freshman year, so we never really dove into anything like this. And everything that I've learned about my environment, I learned outside of school. And so I think having something like this on all schools would create a really good like pathway to start those conversations about, you know, the climate crisis and about renewable energies and how it's affecting us today, especially as the younger generation coming into this with like little to no knowledge at all. And I think it's very necessary to know that there are different alternatives of energy other than just like things that are causing a harmful amount of emissions. I think it would also create like access to knowing what green jobs are and to actually see like what goes into, you know, putting solar on something and how the kids can be involved in that and to really like integrate like the knowledge, the learning, and like the actual doing of it all. And I would think about like if I saw my school being like passionate about this or this type of involvement, I would have felt a lot more like calm and like a little more support around like environmental justice and the climate crisis instead of like having to learn all this outside of school. I wasn't given like any of that curriculum or any of that information, even though I spent the majority of the day or my whole year at school. And I think, let me see, sorry. I think like adding this, we can really improve our environment and like really kind of what would it be like, I've heard like from like older generations or people just older than me in general that, you know, the world got messed up and now it's my job to fix it, or my generations. And I feel like if we could collaborate on something like this, we could really create such a better impact instead of just putting the burden on one particular group, and we could really create like a way better systemic change on a lot of levels. And I think about like my middle and high school, we had like lots of power outages. And that's like a very scary thing for like, especially for kids, you know, and we'd have to get like transported somewhere else because they knew the power wouldn't be turned back on. And, you know, we lost an entire day of learning, and this happened all the time. And I think about like the amount of energy that schools really use and like how it is right now, like only a certain percentage is being covered for these few schools that do have solar, and it's really just not enough. So I feel like having that backup could be something like extremely tremendous, and to really think about what an impact that could create like in reducing emissions from energy use. And I also think it's a very big solution to a lot of like climate crisis issues that are happening, especially in Minnesota. And I think like really moving towards that solar on all schools is like the most imperative part of this, and like creating that accessibility to everybody and all students and all schools. And I think there'll be a really significant impact with like real solutions to make our schools better and a lot of this information more accessible. I think it'd be really cool to like see the state take this on and to show a lot more support when it comes to climate solutions and education. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Your voice and presence are very much so valued. And thank you for being here. We have another youth tonight who is a special friend of mine and a student of mine in the Yeah Network. He is a leader of ours who's worked on bills, helped pass a 100% campaign bill, and is currently working on the Youth Climate Justice Summit. And Tom Lloyd will share that information with you. I'll pass the mic to you, Tom.
Right. I'm going to assume that's a yes. Okay. My name's Tom, and I'm a senior at Jefferson High School in Bloomington. I'm 17, and I've been a part of YAF for around half a year so far. So it's been a really good experience. And what YA is it's short for Youth Environmental Activists. And yeah, is a part of Climate Generation, but it's just for youth. It's run by youth for youth. And we've been really advocating for different projects over the past year. In specific, we've focused our projects on climate justice. I think when we talk about climate change, we all know that youth are an integral part of who's going to face like the effects of what's happening to our world. And so often, like, we enter these conversations and there are just no youth like present. So it's really important to have youth in those conversations. And that's what our role really is. It's to provide this fuel to climate action and try to educate our legislators on why it's important to the next generation of Minnesotans. So one project that we've been working on for a long time now is the Climate Justice Education Bill. So I think a couple of years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, a past cohort of recognized that like climate justice is just not taught in our schools. The fact that Black and brown low income immigrant communities are disproportionately affected by climate change is just not taught to people. And when it's not taught, right, education is power. So people are not empowered to address those issues that our society is facing. And what they did was actually really cool. They just wrote a bill. And then since then, has been stewarding this bill through the legislative process. And this year, we've testified a lot for it. On President's Day, that's the photo on the right, we had a group of like 20 kids. Like this was our day off, and we decided to testify in front of like the Minnesota Senate Committee on Education. That's how passionate we are about this. So we decided to testify in front of the Senate for it, and it passed the Senate Education Committee. And now it just recently got laid over in the House Education Committee. So this is the part where we need your support. We have a petition on Climate Generation's website to garner different environmental action groups in Minnesota support for the bill. So if you guys know any environmental groups that would love to support it, we'd love to share that link out with you guys, because every bit of support counts. And just getting the word out there about the bill is super important to keeping it alive and pushing it forward through the legislative cycle. And on top of that, we've also had we've created a youth action fund where we've been funding any projects that youth come up with in order to create like climate action. So last year, my school actually was a recipient of the grant, and we created a community garden where students could take vegetables and fresh produce if they wanted it or needed it. And we also donated our produce to a local food bank. So it was a really nice community effort. We were able to educate students about gardening, get people involved, and also help the community through it. So it's really amazing what we're able to do. And we also are currently accepting applications. So if there are any educators out there, any people that know anybody who's coming up with like an idea and needs funding for it, we'd love to help fund it. And finally, we've been busy this year. So finally, next Thursday, we have our Youth Climate Justice Summit. And there we're gonna help like talk to legislators about climate justice, why it's important to us. And we're really gonna advocate for bills like the Solar on Schools and the Climate Justice Education Bill. And we're gonna try to and push it through, add a youth voice into the legislative process, and really depict what's on the stake. Like youth are the people that are gonna feel the face of climate change and the face of its effects. So just adding that voice and really making a powerful statement on why this stuff is so important.
Thank you very much, Tom and Michaela, for sharing, for spending your Tuesday night speaking to all of us here around Solar on Schools and the projects you're involved in. I will go on to the next slide and pass it to Jenna, who will let you share out what you can do to support. So Jenna, feel free to hop on.
Yeah, hi all, Jenna Wormuth. She, her, I'm the Midwest Regional Director for Vote Solar. And I know after hearing this information, and oftentimes, you know, when you're in these settings where you're hearing about all these amazing things that are going on and you have an opinion, you're like, what can I do, right? How can I get my voice out there? And a really powerful tool to do that is a letter to the editor. And often these go to either local papers or like maybe online, news resources you can submit them to. And what a letter to the editor really does, it's just a really short summary of your views and your reasons why you're interested in this certain subject matter, or why you have a certain point of view on a policy or a program that's happening. And you can just really get your voice out there. And if it's published, you can have it in your back pocket to just like share. If you're, sending an email to a legislator, you can be like, here's my letter to the editor that got published, right? You can link it, you can share it on social media. It's just a really nice little tool to use. And when you're writing these letters, I think this might be the next slide here, if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so when you're writing these letters, you really just put yourself out there as the expert. You're the expert in your life, and that's really how you should be writing these letters to the editor. It should be a very personal form of expression. So put why you care about solar on schools. Why do you care about, climate education in schools? Make it personal to you, your city, your school district, however you can connect it to your daily life is really important. And keep it brief. Put some facts in there so that folks know. And if you need help with facts, like that's definitely something we can help with. Some other organizations can help you gather those things. And if you do need even more help, I did put together let's see, I'll put it in here. I did put a Google form together. Oops, I just sent that to one person. That you can send to us. You can fill that out, send it out to us. And if you have questions about doing a letter to the editor, whatever, we can definitely help you. If you need tips, if you need some suggestions, whatever you need to help you write one of these, we're willing to help you out with that. And we would really like these to go out just like all over the state. Our vision is having a bunch of folks writing these personal statements about why expansion of solar on schools is important, why climate education is important, and have it going all over the state. Because I think so often we hear from like certain portions of the state because that's where most of the people live. But I think we really want to do outreach all over the place and have these coming to policymakers from across the state. And so that's kind of our plug to you. Can you go to the next slide, Ramiro? Yeah, well, that's what this is. Sorry. Yeah, and then you can submit it to your online newspaper. We can help you find those sources as well and let you know, who to send it to and what are the best sources. So definitely just let us know. And we have some, I know Vote Solar and probably others have some fact sheets and stuff that we can send out to you if you'd like, that would help you out. So just let us know and we're more than willing to help you out. So we see those things go out and those policymakers can see how interested we are in expanding these programs.
Thank you, Jenna, for that presentation. Appreciate you greatly, Simon and Sarah, for giving us details into solar on all schools. Most importantly, Michaela and Tom, for spending your night here and doing all the amazing work in your communities and activating your peers. We have the emails here today to reach out to our guest speakers. I want to applaud all the guests today for asking amazing questions and being present. And hopefully we can assist you with getting solar on your schools and solar for all schools. That will be all for tonight. And resources and links will also be followed up and sent out. So thank everyone for joining us today. You have a good night.